Chapter 29, Part 2 of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Written by Mark Twain from the mid-1870s to mid-1880s. Published in 1885 and read by Clay Shannon in 2020. Well, everybody was in a state of mind now, and they sings out the whole bilin' of 'em's frauds. Let's duck 'em, let's drown 'em, let's ride 'em on a rail. And everybody was whooping at once, and there was a rattle and powwow. But the lawyer, he jumps on the table and yells, and says, Gentlemen, hear me just a word, just a single word, if you please. There's one way yet. Let's go and dig up the corpse and look. That took them. Hooray, they all shouted, and was starting right off. But the lawyer and the doctor sung out, Hold on. Collar all these 4 men and the boy and fetch them along, too. We'll do it, they all shouted, and if we don't find them marks, we'll lynch the whole gang. I was scared now, I tell you. But there weren't no getting away, you know. They gripped us all and marched us right along straight for the graveyard, which was 1.5 miles down the river, and the whole town at our heels. For we made noise enough, and it was only 9 in the evening. As we went by our house, I wished I hadn't seen Mary Jane out of town, because now, if I could tip her the wink, she'd light out and save me and blow on our deadbeats. Well, we swarmed along down the river road, just carrying on like wildcats, and to make it more scary, the sky was darkening up, and the lightning beginning to wink and flitter, and the wind to shiver amongst the leaves. This was the most awful trouble and most dangersome I ever was in, and I was kinder stunned. Everything was going so different from what I had allowed for. Instead of being fixed so I could take my own time if I wanted to and see all the fun and have Mary Jane at my back to save me and set me free when the close fit come, here was nothing in the world betwixt me and sudden death, but just them tattoo marks. If they didn't find them, I couldn't bear to think about it. And yet, somehow, I couldn't think about nothing else. It got darker and darker, and it was a beautiful time to give the crowd the slip. But that big husky had me by the wrist, Hines, and a body might as well try to give Goliath the slip. He dragged me right along, he was so excited, and I had to run to keep up. When they got there, they swarmed into the graveyard and washed over it like an overflow. And when they got to the grave, they found they had about 100 times as many shovels as they wanted, but nobody hadn't thought to fetch a lantern. But they sailed into digging anyway by the flicker of the lightning, and sent a man to the nearest house 1/2 mile off to borrow one. So they dug and dug like everything, and it got awful dark, and the rain started, and the wind swished and swooshed along, and the lightning come brisker and brisker, and the thunder boomed. But them people never took no notice of it. They were so full of this business, and 1 minute you could see everything and every face in that big crowd, and the shovelfuls of dirt sailing up out of the grave, and the next second the dark wiped it all out, and you couldn't see nothing at all. At last they got out the coffin and begun to unscrew the lid, and then such another crowding and shouldering and shoving as there was to scrouge in and get a sight you never see. And in the dark that way it was awful. Hines, he hurt my wrist dreadful, pulling and tugging so, and I reckon he clean forgot I was in the world. He was so excited and panting. All of a sudden, the lightning let go a perfect sluice of white glare, and somebody sings out, By the living jingle, here's the bag of gold on his breast. Hines let out a whoop like everybody else and dropped my wrist and give a big surge to bust his way in and get a look. And the way I lit out and shinned for the road in the dark, there ain't nobody can tell. I had the road all to myself, and I fairly flew. Leastways, I had it all to myself except the solid dark, and the now and then glares, and the buzzing of the rain, and the thrashing of the wind, and the splitting of the thunder, and sure as you are born, I did clip it along. When I struck the town, I see there warn't nobody out in the storm, so I never hunted for no back streets, but humped it straight through the main one. And when I begun to get towards our house, I aimed my eye and set it. No light there. The house all dark, which made me feel sorry and disappointed. I didn't know why, but at last, just as I was sailing by, flash comes the light in Mary Jane's window, and my heart swelled up sudden like to bust. In the same second, the house and all was behind me in the dark and wasn't ever going to be before me no more in this world. She was the best girl I ever see, and had the most sand. The minute I was far enough above the town to see I could make the towhead, I begun to look sharp for a boat to borrow, and the first time the lightning showed me one that wasn't chained, I snatched it and shoved. It was a canoe and warn't fastened with nothing but a rope. The towhead was a rattling big distance off, away out there in the middle of the river, but I didn't lose no time. And when I struck the raft at last, I was so fagged I would have just laid down to blow and gasp if I could have afforded it. But I didn't. As I sprung aboard, I sung out, "Out with you, Jim, and set her loose. Glory be to goodness, we're shut of them." Jim lit out and was a-comin' for me with both arms spread. He was so full of joy. But when I glimpsed him in the lightning, my heart shut up in my mouth, and I went overboard backwards. For I forgot he was old King Lear and a drownded Arab all in one, and it most scared the livers and lights out of me. But Jim fished me out and was going to hug me and bless me and so on. He was so glad I was back, and we were shut of the king and the duke. But I says, "Not now. Have it for breakfast. Have it for breakfast. Cut loose and let her slide." So in 2 seconds away we went a-sliding down the river, and it did seem so good to be free again, and all by ourselves on the big river, and nobody to bother us. I had to skip around a bit and jump up and crack my heels a few times. I couldn't help it. But about the 3rd crack, I noticed a sound that I knowed mighty well, and held my breath and listened and waited. And sure enough, when the next flash busted out over the water, here they come, and just a-laying to their oars and making their skiff hum. It was the king and the duke. So I wilted right down onto the planks then and give up. And it was all I could do to keep from crying.